All right. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to the final session of the MPP Policy Lab presentations. My name is Chris Reagan. I'm the director of the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill, and I'm coming to you today from my home in Gimli, Manitoba, which is situated on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe. Many of you are actually close to McGill's downtown Montreal campus, in which case you are on or near the traditional territory of the Kanigahaka, the Mohawk Nation. But wherever you are currently sitting, I encourage you to better understand the history of your location and to recognize its Indigenous heritage. Now, the rules of the game here, as always, are that the team will have 30 minutes for presentation. My egg timer will go off after 28 minutes. There it is. Then we'll have 10 minutes for questions from faculty. And we've got Luc Vallée, and then Jennifer Welsh, and then Natalie Duchesnay in that order for the faculty. Then we have 10 minutes of Q&A from the sponsors that are DEC, the Développement Économique Canada. And then 10 minutes of Q&A to the open audience. So as always, I'm going to ask you to put your questions in the chat box so that I can moderate the Q&A. So without further ado, we have got the team from DEC, and their challenge is, how can artificial intelligence be harnessed in federal, regional, economic development policymaking to better measure and anticipate the well-being of Quebec's diverse communities? All right, team, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. For those who we haven't met yet, my name is Michaela, and I'm here today with my Policy Lab teammates, Rim, Leo, and Ellen, to present our findings on the potential for measuring regional well-being in Quebec with artificial intelligence. We were tasked by Canada Economic Development for Quebec regions to explore the question, how might artificial intelligence be harnessed in federal regional economic development policymaking to better assess and anticipate the well-being of Quebec's diverse communities. Our team then deconstructed this question into 4 key components that could help us answer it. First, selecting well-being indicators that align with the agency's goals. Second, using traditional and innovative data sources to measure indicators. Third, managing well-being data through the life cycle. And finally, the potential for harnessing AI to turn data into meaningful insights. These 4 key components were used to structure our research and provide the guiding outline of a conceptual framework we developed. For the remainder of the presentation, we will walk you through each of the components and corresponding research findings and recommendations. But before we get started, there are some things to note about the conceptual framework. So while we see many separate elements in this diagram, they all connect. And so it should be viewed as an entire process, because a key insight that emerged during the research is that determining what questions you have and what problems you want to solve will contribute to which indicators and data sources are selected and whether you need artificial intelligence. The potential use of AI is shown with a star in the conceptual framework. However, the use of AI in stages 2 and 3 are more so for the efficiency in data collection and management. Rather, the use of AI to assess and anticipate well-being, as set out in the question, comes at the later stage, in stage 4. So starting with the first stage, establishing well-being goals will help inform which indicators are selected. It's important to understand why measuring regional well-being is important in the first place. First, economic indicators do not provide a full picture of how a region is doing, because they don't include important information about the health of regions and communities, such as who is doing well from growth, whether growth is environmentally sustainable, how people feel about their lives, and what factors are contributing to individual and country level success. Looking beyond a narrow economic view will help policymakers better understand problems and respond with interventions that meet the whole needs of communities. Second, economic, social, and environmental issues are interconnected and multidimensional. Measuring the well-being of regions will help policymakers better understand the interconnectedness of economic issues with other issues such as health, education, sustainability, inclusiveness, how people use their time, etc., so that policies can be designed for multidimensional impacts. Third, well-being indexes have emerged around the world, including Canada's recent quality of life strategy, providing a broad framework for including well-being indicators into decision-making. As the government moves towards making economic decisions with more information beyond key economic indicators, we anticipate better decisions can be made that prioritize people and the environment. So when selecting well-being indicators, the Government of Canada's quality of life strategy provides useful factors to consider. While no indicator is perfect and no indicator will meet all of these listed factors, such as relevance, clarity, accuracy, it's important to understand the trade-offs of what type of information an indicator is able to provide based on the data that can be used, and if that's useful for CED's well-being goals and desired outcomes. Keeping that in mind, the first recommendation is to develop an organization-specific well-being framework aligned with the agency's strategic plan. The objectives in CED's strategic plan are quite balanced between economic, social, and environmental aspects. So framing the overarching understanding of well-being with what you hope to achieve and what information is needed to inform progress will be useful in aligning it with the priorities that are already established in CED's plan. So for example, sustainable development, support for marginalized groups, improving the types of work and conditions in regions. Since well-being indicators are interconnected and multidimensional, a combination should be included in a framework that reflects a balance across the various well-being dimensions. The Government of Canada's quality of life strategy, along with the OECD Better Life Index, the Canadian Index of Well-being, and Donut Economics have many similar indicators that we've included in the report that can be used as a good starting point to choose from. The second recommendation is to choose well-being indicators that have reliable, relevant data that can be measured over time. CED should ask which well-being indicators provide useful information for their goals and which indicators have reliable, relevant, and timely data. As mentioned before, there will never be a perfect indicator or measure. Rather, the measure should accurately reflect the indicator and the dimension, taking into consideration the selection criteria previously shown. We suggest that health offers a useful starting place, as there are many proxies, data sources, and examples of using community-level data to understand well-being. There are also available and existing processes where AI is currently being used to measure mental health, suicide rates, life expectancy, and non-health indicators, including predicting air quality. And we expand on more of these in the report. The third recommendation is to use a dashboard to visualize well-being indicator data across regions and to measure progress over time. Dashboards and disaggregated data are more useful than composite indexes when dealing with well-being data. Composite indexes assign a weight to various measures and reduce it to one indicator, score, or ranking, whereas dashboards provide a level of granularity for each of the indicators, which is more useful for targeted interventions. Most indexes use dashboards, and it was also a recommendation from the Government of Canada's quality of life strategy. And this next slide, this is an example of the UK's well-being dashboard that allows users to select the information and see progress made against indicators. And in CED's context, it's important to ask what the purpose of their dashboard would be, if it's for internal decision-making or if in the long term, the release of public information can achieve transparency and accountability objectives, similar to the way that other national governments provide functionality and ease of use for looking through this data. So now my colleague Rim will discuss how different data sources can be used to measure well-being.
Thank you, Michaela. So I'll now discuss our second component of the conceptual framework, which is using data sources to measure indicators for well-being. In this section, I'll discuss some of the key elements of the research, including some considerations in choosing data sources, as well as some challenges and limitations. I'll also go briefly over the different types of data sources that CED could use to measure well-being indicators and to later leverage the use of AI. So for effective decision-making, and especially in the context of CED's mandate, it's important to collect good and reliable data. And although statistics can be used to analyze a region and its impacts with accuracy, the majority of statistics currently capture national averages and can fail to recognize the disparities across populations and communities. So when selecting data sources, CED should follow the same principles as selecting indicators. That is that first, to ensure that the appropriate data sources is available and reflects the indicators selected. The data sources should also be representative of the geographic area and the target population that is being measured. Combining data sources will also provide for the most opportunity for useful and targeted insight, although integrating various data sets can be time-consuming. And this is in part due to the variations in the way that data is defined, recorded, and analyzed. Another challenge is the lack of consistency among local, provincial, and national systems, which have varying access and availability. Some general challenges to collect data in remote communities include lack of accuracy and representativity. Also, lack of data sharing in Canada creates an additional challenge to access quality data. In terms of types of data sources, there are both traditional and innovative data sources that can be used to measure indicators of well-being. And while they both have their strengths and limitations, together they can present a better picture of a region's well-being. Some examples of traditional data, probably the ones that CED is currently using, include household and consumption data, administrative data, survey and censuses data, as well as other types of statistics. Some relevant examples of innovative data can include telecommunications data, such as call detail records, which can monitor time-specific and interactive data on mobile phone use. There's also geospatial data, which refers to GPS and transportation data, and can monitor time and location coordinate information. Social media data, which mostly gathers information about online users, can measure social dynamics through platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And web search data, which derives from web search engines and monitors terms entered to find information, such as Google Trends, can also help measure well-being indicators. Lastly, we just want to point out that new and innovative data sources have great potential to help fill in knowledge gaps in traditional data sources and overcome some of their limitations. They can also allow CED to better analyze the opportunities for economic expansion in regions and have the potential to provide much more real-time data. Innovative data sources can also help identify relationships between institutions, networks, and residents within or outside of a region. So our recommendations for this section are threefold. First, we recommend that CED determine the desired outcomes and insights from using particular data sets. So similar to when choosing indicators, it's important to first identify sources, whether they're traditional or innovative, that satisfies and aligns with CED's interests, and that accurately measures the chosen well-being indicators. Some guiding questions for CED include what data sources align with our interests and desired outcomes, what types of data sources would provide the most valuable information when identifying well-being measures and indicators. Our second recommendation is for CED to use disaggregated data by age, gender, race, disability, etc. A disaggregated approach to data collection that incorporates new data sources, new collection techniques, and community-level data can help close the knowledge gap. And by disaggregating the data by region, CED would be better able to understand the impact of its policies more precisely and at a regional level. Some of the questions to guide CED include what community-level data can we gather to ensure data from rural communities is obtained? And how can we leverage innovative data sources to gather granular data and data from underrepresented groups? And finally, our third recommendation in this section is for CED to use a diverse set of data that includes both traditional and innovative data sources to fill in the knowledge gap. Some questions to guide CED in this section include what data sources would be relevant to measure a particular indicator, how data sources, whether innovative or traditional or both, can be used to fill in gaps and complement each other, and what multiple data sources can we use to improve data integration. So I'll now pass it on to Leo to discuss a third component of the conceptual framework, which is basically how to make sense of the data sources through architecture, data architecture and management.
Thank you, Rem. So for this next step, CED would have already defined its well-being goals and have chosen the indicators it wants to measure and analyze. Managing the data through the life cycle is this middle step, merging the input and output from the data collection phase all the way to creating meaningful insights. Now, data management is this process of an organized and documented sequence of administering data from when it is created or acquired to its archival point that creates a sound foundation for the part that we're looking for, adopting AI. Now, this process begins with the collection of data, the data preparation. This is reviewing and exploring the data, cleaning the data, and structuring it, and finally, storing the data. As you can observe, the data governance overreaches the data architecture and data management. But what is data governance? Now, this part represents the set of rules and policies for staff that determine decision-making and authority for data-related matters. Similarly, it tackles that data quality concerns and manages the availability, the usability, the integrity, and security of data and data assets. While the data governance focuses on the organization, the data architecture, on the other hand, focuses on the technology and the infrastructure. Some examples are the design of standardizing how data is collected, transformed, distributed, stored, and used. In short words, the data management lifecycle is enabled by the data governance and the data architecture. Now, data management is critical to enabling the long-term harnessing of AI within the organization for 4 reasons, which are later expanded in the report. So first, it can enhance CED's data literacy by helping staff understand how data frameworks operate and provide a clear guidance on how the agency manages its data. Second, to help identify, it helps identify opportunities and gaps in current processes by using tools and best practices to diagnose the organization. Third, it helps to improve the efficiency and standardization of processes so they can be replicated and used consistently in the long term. And fourth, the data management can optimize and increase the data capability within the organization so that for more complex AI tools that require more data, they can be used effectively and efficiently. Now, the Policy Lab team found through research that it is recommended that data governance, data architecture, and data management plan be aligned throughout the data management lifecycle to harness AI in the long term. First, our recommendation is that CED builds a data governance and data architecture framework. So, as we said, data governance is an organizational process and structure. It is the interaction among the people, the processes, the technology, and the culture that triggers its success and its failure. It also aims to understand the risks and opportunities of managing CED's data. Therefore, CED could identify who uses the data and under what circumstances it is used. For example, who is responsible for the well-being indicator and its different sources, from collecting the sources, preparing the data, and storing it. Furthermore, the objective of data governance is to keep it clear and simple to help CED to administer the data, especially to reduce costs and complexity. For those asking for an example, data governance will vary according to every organization's needs and capacity. And data architecture as part of the data governance must reflect the appropriate technology and design to harness the AI in the long term, which can include cloud-based systems, real-time data streaming, and using modular platforms. So some key questions CED should ask as they are developing the data governance and data architecture is what key components are needed before AI can be adopted? What opportunities and gaps can be identified? How will these frameworks be used to improve understanding of CED's role managing the data? Our second recommendation is for CED to compose a data management plan. While many aspects overlap with the components involved in the data governance, the plan not only describes the data's management, and also it describes the analysis and the storage, but it describes the well-being data that will be acquired and generated. It can also help assess the organizational and system requirements. Best practices of data management can be looked at to help to guide the process, including file format, the use of metadata, making malleable data, protecting sensitive data, and visualizing data like we mentioned with the dashboard previously. CED must evaluate whether its existing organizational capabilities and system requirements are sufficient to manage its data, which contributes to CED's future AI readiness. Some guiding questions CED should ask as they develop the data management are, what data does the agency want to acquire and to generate? What is currently in place that can be built on? And how will they determine if this data management is optimal? This brings us to the third recommendation. Now, CED could take the step to build an initial team that provides a diagnosis, and this helps identify the gaps in the organization's data efficiency and effectiveness. mentioned already in the data management plan. Now, this team can guide CED's data management towards what it has, and what it needs. So CED could observe how some provincial ministries operate already. However, CED has an initial condition of being a smaller agency. As an example, what some companies do if their data management team is small is to merge the roles or work with short-term contracts. So CED should ask, who needs to be involved to help distinguish CED's data management capabilities? How will these members help CED operate according to its plan? The last recommendation for this part on the framework is that CED selects a database management system that fits the organization's requirements. And this is a software that helps provide the interface between users and the database. It provides a visible view into the data set as a single unit. So that means bringing all the sources and all the parts into one. So this helps define the data, update the data, retrieve it and query, perform database administration. But the thing is that CED has an access to cloud brokering services for storage, for example, with Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, IBM. These can be found on the Government of Canada's Cloud Brokering Services catalog. Apart from the storage, this catalog covers governance, data management, API management, artificial intelligence, among others. The team recommends that CED covers the 3 previous points to later approach the best service provider and inquire for a quote. So CED should consider questions like how they store, compile, and generate the data currently, and what options exist, and what will best fulfill the needs. Now, I give the floor to Ellen, who will talk about the last point, how to turn the data into a meaningful insights, otherwise known as the artificial intelligence section.
Thanks so much, Leo. So far we've highlighted potential well-being indicators and the ways in which to collect and manage the data through the life cycle. Now, this 4th and final section of the conceptual framework is turning the data into meaningful insights. And I'll just begin this section with a little introduction on artificial intelligence to get everyone up to speed. And then I'll get into the ways in which CED can turn data into these meaningful insights. So artificial intelligence is the ability of a computer system to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. Similar to the human brain, AI can review information, learn from its mistakes, it can weigh options, and perform actions like decision-making, with and without supervision. Machine learning is one type of an algorithm model, and it's often used due to its capability to decrease text analysis delays when reviewing large amounts of documents, as well as its prediction capabilities. Now, there's both opportunities and challenges in harnessing AI. Some of the opportunities include reducing time on mundane tasks, and AI can be applied to existing CED processes. And by using well-being indicators and innovative data sources, AI models will prove useful in predicting and measuring regional health. Now, the challenges include AI is lacking in ethical use frameworks. However, CED can look to European Commission for ethical framework examples. AI also requires a lot of data, and it is a complex system, meaning that a data scientist or expert in the field is required. Driving business value from AI is grounded in the notion that an efficient government requires a digital transformation, leveraging of data analytics, and artificial intelligence where applicable. In order for CED to harness AI, we recommend following 6 adoption AI pillars seen on this screen. And I'm going to go from left to right. So the first one on the left is establishing organizational readiness for AI. So departmental readiness for adopting AI tools requires assistance from experts in data science and AI. Responsible AI guidelines is the second pillar. So with many promising benefits to government and small and medium enterprises, or SMEs, across Canada, CED must adopt flexible yet strong guidelines for using these AI tools. Third is the AI strategy. Once CED establishes the organizational readiness and responsible AI guidelines, it's essential that the agency develop an AI strategy that takes into account the ways in which the agency intends to use AI. And this strategy should align with the data management plan and overarching data governance frameworks, and should include AI project ideation and proof of concept, or POC. The fourth is harnessing these AI tools. So the testing phase is part of the 4th section in the conceptual framework. AI tools are selected by the experts based on available data and questions CED hopes to answer. The fifth pillar is policy principles, and these might include transparency and accountability, among others. And the sixth pillar is AI culture and technology adoption. So once AI culture work is underway, the agency should continue to review publicly available information from open source websites and continue to build AI culture through partnerships and collaborations with some of the key stakeholders we interviewed, as well as other government departments. Towards the end of our policy brief, we've actually provided some technology adoption case studies, such as measuring suicide rates and mental health with AI. As I head into the recommendation section, you can see, similar to my colleagues that presented before, we have some guiding questions on the right-hand side. So the first recommendation is developing an AI strategy. A few questions CED should begin to think about include how can an AI strategy complement the development of data management plans, and what should CED establish first when turning data into meaningful insights? Well, prior to determining which algorithm models will be used in the testing phase of the conceptual framework, it's important and that we recommend CED establish data governance and other applicable policy principles. We also suggest CED use AI project ideation to help with brainstorming AI project ideas and develop proof of concepts to better determine whether or not an AI tool is necessary. The second recommendation is testing the AI models to determine the best tool. This recommendation does require help from an expert, data scientist, or anyone else in the field, based on their knowledge and ability to answer these questions and test models moving forward. The third recommendation is reviewing the responsible AI guidelines and policies. So which policies and principles need to be adhered to when using the AI models? And how can CED remain accountable to Government of Canada standards? These are a few questions that we should keep in mind. So ensuring that CED remains compliant with data governance frameworks, policy principles, internal mandate requirements, they're all fundamental to using AI tools and algorithmic models. We also suggest establishing a review process to ensure transparency and accountability. The fourth is visualizing the output on a dashboard. So how can the information be best displayed for decision makers? And what should CED use moving forward? Well, CED should continue to use Power BI dashboard to visualize the output from the selected AI model. And we suggest using dashboards similar to what our suggestion was in the well-being section, because they're effective at arranging information and presenting a tailored display that is easy to follow for any audience. Although this recommendation is optional, using a dashboard was mentioned by almost all of our interviewees. So if we think back to the research question for a moment, of how might artificial intelligence be harnessed in federal or regional economic development policy making to better assess and anticipate the well-being of Quebec's diverse communities, there's a few key takeaways to keep in mind as CED moves forward. So CED must pay particular attention to establishing the well-being goals and data sources. In our policy brief, we've included a list of data sources that could be used in the preliminary stages of this project. Data governance structures and architectures are also important, especially if CED hopes to build effective, ethical, and sustainable data management plans when using AI in the long term. The interconnectedness of the framework means that CED will be better prepared to turn data into meaningful insights. The potential use of AI could present a long-term solution to some of CED's existing data challenges in hopes of creating more adaptive, responsive, and inclusive policy interventions. As the government continues to move forward measuring well-being and understanding the increasing role technology plays in our lives, we believe that these four components of the conceptual framework will set CED up for success. Strong data management and governance systems will best position CED to become a leader in future policy making within this domain. Thank you very much for listening. We look forward to answering your questions. Merci.
Thank you, team. Great job. All pre-egg timer. Well done. All right, Luc Vallée, you are first up for questions from faculty, and then Jennifer, and then Natalie.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for this thorough and rigorous presentation, although at 3 p.m. on a Friday in the middle of the summer, after 2 days of presentation, I listened to all of them. It's a little harder to digest, but I was lucky to have the presentation before and to have read the brief. So I'm going to put you in a role-playing situation for maybe two questions. I'm going to ask one now, And Chris may come back to me towards the end of the session for the second question, which will be in the same role-playing situation. So you are the DG of Policy and Performance Measurement at DEC, as said, and I will be the Deputy Minister. And after having read your report and your presentation, we meet in the corridor. And I'm a bit skeptical about this project as I'm not an IT person, and I can't help to notice that the project is very IT intensive. DEC doesn't have that many resources. It's complicated. And I'm only a DM. I'm a stupid DM, you know, Deputy Minister, don't know much. I'm just managing resources. So explain to me in simple steps, how are you going to convince me that this is a doable project? So I'm not looking for an answer like you're going to start by a proof of concept, because that's like a sidetracking the answer, the question. Although you can use this proof of concept principle to tell me what the proof of concept would look like. So what I'd like to know is what variables will you use to measure well-being, how capturing this information will help me fulfill my mission at DEC, and how AI concretely will help CED's performance in the future. So please give me examples, and I will, as you think about that, I will just say something that I think everybody should know. I worked at DEC for 5 years. I was in charge of performance measurement. I started to implement the automation of the data gathering. So, but in all fairness, and Fadi is listening, and I know Stefan is there too, I never spoke at any time during the year about anything of this mandate. I only knew that it existed because I knew what the mandates were. And I learned everything that I learned from Wednesday morning when I received both the presentation and the brief. So I gave you a few more seconds to think about my question. Please go ahead.
All right, no pressure, folks. It's a DEC insider. Okay, who's going to take a shot at that, or at least the first shot?
Sure. So I think maybe what you're talking about here is the business case for using AI in this capacity. And so one of the first things that we would say is that there's trends are moving towards the government measuring well-being and establishing a digital transformation. And so these are important for the long-term sustainability of any organization that's planning on measuring economic development in localized regions. And so because this is, we want to think about problems differently, agencies should be adapting to moving towards some of these things that we recommended. And so AI, we see the potential because it can help provide new insights into what we may not previously are able to use, because it unlocks a new value by being able to leverage data that's available that the agency may not be able to use right now. And that it's also important that AI can help reduce costs in the long term and complexity, because it reduces the amount of time that data analysts can spend on cleaning, structuring the data at the early stages of the process, as well as longer. However, when building a business case, it's important to have an even more well-defined problem. And so what is the agency really hoping to do in the regions? And so an example of that could be the agency is looking to support regions that have high pollution with investment in sustainable businesses. And then AI may be able to predict which regions are at a risk with more pollution or less pollution, and then be able to design policy interventions in that way. And so while you mentioned not mentioning a proof of concept, it is really essential in any of the AI journey and possibilities we embark on. And so that, I think that's really important to hypothesize what AI might be able to do, and then be able to provide some options on how you might go about solving it.
Okay, so Luke's second question is going to get bumped to the third section. That's great. Can I turn now to Jennifer for your question?
Great. I have a quick one and then a more detailed one, Chris. The quick one is, when you think about organizations out there that effectively and credibly and legitimately harness AI, who would you hold up as the gold standard? And what are the one or two features or capabilities of that organization that currently does this super well? My second question is, I'm really interested to get more into a discussion of Quebec and Quebec's diverse regions. And so I wondered if you could say a bit more about the potential of geospatial data and how and in what specific context do you think it could be harnessed for the purposes of assessing well-being?
All right, I'll tackle your first question. Looking at organizations that credibly harness the AI and kind of the gold standard. So in doing our stakeholder interviews, Government of Alberta, I was talking with a gentleman there and he was telling me about how they're already using AI and how they kind of plan to use AI moving forward. So their government department is kind of a great example of the gold standard of using AI. So example of what they do when they're trying to detect the forest fires, they have AI, they have cameras, and then the AI is able to detect, depending on the smoke. They're also able to look at weather patterns. So when there's lots of snow, when do they actually need to bring out the snow plows rather than having individuals kind of always looking at the cameras. You always have the kind of human review of it to make sure that, yes, this is what's happening when you have the camera systems going on. Part of your question was the features of the organization.
Yeah, so what are the things that the government of Alberta has, or what are its features or capabilities that allow it to do that so well?
So kind of going back to what Michaela was talking about and that we mentioned in the presentation is the proof of concepts. They really tackled this as the first step to what you have to do, even before looking at having an expert, whether you hire it in for a contractor or you have someone on your team. It depends on kind of the project. So by having the proof of concept, you're kind of able to test a working model of what you're hoping to do without putting all of those resources into it. And the project ideation, brainstorming the different questions that the government of Alberta has, as well as what could be done to kind of accommodate or help reduce the time for mundane tasks, whether you're using natural language processing for reviewing text, or if you're using machine learning to use for those predictive capabilities. They use both of those and have found it to be very effective, especially when you're when you have an idea and you need to kind of get management buy-in to make sure that, yes, this idea moves forward. By having these kind of working models and these brainstorming sessions, you're really able to get at the heart of what the issue is, what questions you're hoping to answer, and what can you do about it, whether you're using AI or more simple algorithm models.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to take Jennifer's second question on geospatial data, and I'm going to put it into the third section. So I'm going to go to Natalie now, please, and ask for your question.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, team. I'm going to piggyback on Luke's question about it's complicated and ask you maybe a broader question about the use of AI in government, given that you've been looking at this for so many months now. There seems to clearly be a lag in the use of AI inside government to inform policy decisions, and certainly lagging behind industry. And I wondered if you could give us some insight as to why that may be and how we could do a course correction.
So one thing that I'll mention first and then provide some time for my colleagues is that AI right now is really being used for very specific and narrow functions right now. So solving or measuring one indicator, or, you know, in the case of Alberta, detecting forest fires, snow plows, some examples that are very, you know, constrained and defined. And that those opportunities in government require, a lot of buy-in, and they require time to help develop them, along with, culture and organizational processes that may provide barriers for that.
Yeah, if I kind of jump in, I think one of the things, like Michaela is saying, is that also the objective of the AI use is very important. So if we're talking about government, for example, trying to look at well-being, well, this is very new. They're looking at the indicators, probably at one indicator, one bit of the dimension, what bit of the fraction. For example, the report mentions about suicide detection and prevention through natural language processing. And this is just one. But if we're talking about the government trying to look like at all the different ones that are going out there, this is groundbreaking work. And we have to give it to CED that this is a great example of getting the different aspects of use of AI into a specific role. So why is it hard? Well, not everyone is doing it. It's a bit dispersed at the moment. It's in its initial phase. And there is, like, if you ask us, like, is there an example of AI being measured or predicting well-being? Well, there's not really. They're doing it a bit in a different tune, but you could say that they're using AI in different parts, like in different versions. Mostly could be industrial, and later we can talk about the use of AI for some countries that are more concerned about giving a good service rather than considering the well-being. It's more about that part. So it depends what the government is looking for and if the question is feasible. And I think when we talk about well-being, well, it's just in the beginning.
Okay, thank you. Natalie, please let me know in the chat box if you would like a second question in the final round. For now, I'm going to turn it over to the people from DEC. Fadi Haddad is ready to go. Fadi?
Thanks, Christopher. Excellent presentation, guys. This is a question that is in line a bit with what Luc had mentioned earlier, in terms of if you were to see the deputy minister who's interested in implementing AI and really want to do this in the short term, is it realistic for us to put something in place in the next 6 months? So no matter, I'll call it the pilot or proof of concept, but can we start small without having to implement a whole data governance approach or AI strategy before putting something in place? So that's the first question. And the second question is, you have spoken to more than 30 stakeholders, from the OECD to the tech sector, to economists, to LinkedIn. Based on your discussions, what opportunities do you see in terms of partnerships for us to implement AI at CED? And I know you spoke about data literacy a bit, and that could be potentially one avenue in terms of partnerships. Thank you.
Okay, so I could start a bit with what we are recommending. We recommend small steps. We don't want you to cover the entire framework in one go because it's very difficult. The report mentions part of the frameworks to get towards a good quality level of data management. We should just working with the first step, that is CED has a very clear objective of what the data it wants to collect and generate. And the more precise, the more manageable it's going to be. So you can still work with, for example, minimal data management. Once you have your 3 sources, let's say you want to have 3 indicators that you want to look at. And we recommend also that you use small things because you're a small agency. So this is important to consider. And then you want to manage that. However, you can simply say, I don't want to start with the entire part of managing the data, but I want to take a couple of basic steps. Now, the thing about this is the one that we say is have a data management plan and have your team. So the good thing about these 2 parts, which we believe are the basic, like initial statements, is that it's going to help you start thinking about how you're going to do this and if it's feasible. We talk about the team also can tell you the trade-offs of doing, like having a basic data management, for example, and they will tell you, well, you're going to get, but until a certain level. If you start with basic, you're going to do it with basic stuff, with basic points. If you want to actually expand that, well, you need to start applying more parts of the recommendations that we're putting here, because it demands more management, it demands more people, it demands probably more technology. And therefore, you would have actually to start putting those objectives clearly. And that's why we say small steps. So for example, I like this example of what happened with Desjardins, where they were collecting data, but they were not very good with their data governance. And well, that caused a leak. And those are the risks that your team is going to tell you when you say, we can do a data management plan, but we're skipping the governance at the moment. If you actually want to cover the security of some of the data you're going to handle, well, it's important that you start putting which are going to be the next steps and but just putting down what are the risks and what are like some of the things of ambitions that you can actually step in. So as I mentioned, choose few indicators, start with basic ones, start with health, we also mentioned environment and some of economic ones, move towards easy, innovative tools that are accessible. Some of them are cheaper, and the ones that you can actually combine and easier to do a data management plan. Your team is going to do it. And then, well, you can start testing it if it actually can be done with AI. I think that would be the right way. And I'm using my framework as I remember. And if you want to add more things and you want to be more ambitious with your DG, well, you're going to say, well, we need probably more things, but baby steps always makes it better. It's going to be more efficient and it's going to be clearer.
I'll tackle your second question. Oh, Professor Reagan, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Ellen, do you want to add to that, or do you want to take on Fadi's second question?
I can tackle the second question. So we interviewed over 40 stakeholders for this project, learned a lot, attended lots of conferences and webinars. And the majority of the stakeholders that we did talk to are very open and looking forward to connecting with you, Fadi. The existing kind of partnerships, establishing partnerships that are possible already. The government of Alberta, in talking with them, they've said that if we'll connect you with them and we'll make sure that you'll get a list of all the willing stakeholders aside from the policy brief and aside from this presentation, just for keeping personal information private. And then Deloitte's AI Institute, they have features where, of course, it comes at a cost, but if you wanted them to kind of come in and review the organization and kind of look at where you're at now, if you're AI ready, and then kind of use the private sector resources in that way, that's always an option. And then the AI Institute in Alberta, Amy, they actually have a bank of data scientists and AI experts if you were looking to have a contractor come in and help you with the AI side of the testing tools. So there's many different opportunities. You will be getting something from us with those, and then moving forward, ask if you have questions, of course. I think it'll kind of be a group effort of who'd we talk to, and a lot of the time when we talk to stakeholders, they would actually say, oh, make sure you talk to this other person because they'll be very helpful. So keep an eye out for that, but there's a lot of possibilities in the future.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to open it up to the general audience, and I've got 5 names on the list. I've got Corolla Vile, and then Jonathan, then Dorothy, then Luke, and then Jennifer. And if there's any others, send them in, but these will have to be fairly short questions and fairly short answers. Take it away, Corolla.
Thank you, and thank you to the presenters. Very interesting discussion. That's one that many of our employers are grappling with. My question really, and I should say I'm Dean of Continuing Studies here at McGill University. My question is actually in the chat, but what I was interested in is in your pillars of adoption, where were you thinking about the training of non-AI specialists who have to interact with AI for the long run? I think this is related to some of the other comments that have come up already. How do you actually familiarize, and at what point do you do that to make sure that people know when AI should be used, when not, how to leverage the capabilities of AI even without being an AI specialist or expert? Thank you.
So because AI is very complicated and the systems require lots of data, as we all know, that's kind of why we've recommended having the expert come in. But for current people that are trying to adopt it, the education side comes with the readiness and the establishing the organizational. When you're establishing organizational readiness, part of that is the kind of education side of how do we make sure that people understand that AI coming in does not is not meaning that it's replacing you entirely. It's not taking over what you're already doing. I'm just trying to find your exact question so I can make sure I answer it completely.
That's fine. It was at the very top. It was really just about the training requirements for lay people. And the fact that when you are thinking about AI adoption, you need to, in fact, put in place a plan and budget for it to continuously train non-AI specialists in AI, the integration of AI tools along the way. So I would suggest that in your pillars of adoption, there are actually several times when you will want to look at training requirements, and there may need to be separate budgets and resources available for that that are independent of your actual acquisition of AI expertise.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. That's a wonderful point. And just to kind of go off that as well, if I can kind of in my work in cybersecurity, when we had to come and kind of educate people on what cybersecurity is in the first place, we had, when we're talking about policy principles, the transparency, accountability, we kind of lumped in education within that to make sure that people who are in policy who don't have the cybersecurity, and similar to AI, when we're talking with stakeholders, making sure that everyone's on the same page so that you're able to have kind of the language that you use is still high level. It's not dumbing it down, but anyone, any kind of audience is able to join in the conversation and determine what's needed, what the budgets are, what the plan is. Do we need an expert, or do we already have that kind of internal expertise? Kind of moving forward, it's a bit of a team effort, but we'll make sure to add that in.
We've also included a list in our report of like available training modules and education opportunities for people within CED. So that there's opportunities to engage in conferences and continuous learning with all of these organizations that we've talked to and that we'll connect the organization with to expand on these opportunities within the organization.
Okay, can I turn it to Jonathan, and then Dorothy is next up.
Thank you. And what I wanted to ask is, what well-being indicators seem more promising for AI use when we're thinking about this type of adoption?
Sure. So we recommended that health was a great place to start because it kind of aligns with all of the aspects in the conceptual framework. On the first side, it's very connected to the economy. There's lots of evidence that shows when people are doing well, the economy is doing better. On the second phase, there's community level data available, often framed as social determinants of health or community level data. And then there's examples of AI being used in precision medicine right now while leveraging community level data to make predictions. And so we think that's a promising place to start, as well as air quality. However, we don't suggest necessarily choosing well-being indicators on their AI potential because there's going to be indicators that are better for certain things and better with other things. So while some may have AI examples, some will be able to be used with certain innovative data sources that have available and accessible data that we'd want to consider. And then even before that, we'd want to measure what the agency is looking for to track progress in Quebec. So that would be more upstream with the CED strategic plan and what they're hoping to learn.
Okay, thank you. Dorothy, you're up.
Yes, I'm curious in knowing if your proposed AI process can be expanded to other provinces or jurisdictions. Thanks.
Thanks, Dorothy. That's a great question. So yes, because as of 2017, the Government of Canada actually created the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, or CFAR as some people know it. And this is along with the Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy. It's a national strategy to start using AI, whether it's government, whether it's private sector, public sector, think tanks, not-for-profits. So with what we proposed for the Quebec region could be applied in other provinces. Alberta's already has kind of a leg up on using the AI already. You have the Vector Institute in Ontario, and by having the kind of 3 national research institutes, it kind of sets the stage for what's possible moving forward. Now, there are some, to our knowledge, that don't have either university programs on AI or the kind of research institutes. But with the Pan-Canadian strategy and then the innovative data sources we're proposing, that it is definitely possible to apply. Now, it's important to note that when you're applying one policy from one area to another, you're definitely going to have to tweak it a little bit to make sure that it does fit what's needed in Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, for example. But it's promising that, yes, you could apply it to other provinces aside from Quebec.
Okay, in our last couple of minutes, I want to go to Luc Vallée and then Jennifer Welsh for their second question from their first round. Luc?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put you in the same scenario situation. You're the DG of Policy and Performance Measurement at DEC. I'm the DM, but instead of being pessimistic, I'm overly enthusiastic. I want you to start with this project. And as you know, sometimes organizations have courage and they are able to reject projects. So I would like you to talk to me as the DM who wants to start right away and make the case against adding the AI piece to this project. So I don't want you to get rid of the first part of the project, which is adopting well-being indicators that is in line with the government long-term initiatives. We all agreed it's good. I'm for it as the DM, but I want you to convince me that the AI piece, given what you know about the state of AI today, CED structure, mission, limited resources, the federal government, its complexity, the nature of the well-being indicators that's already complex, and any other consideration, make the case, please, against using deploying the AI infrastructure to measure performance at DEC. 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll start by tackling this. So you don't always have to have AI. In our presentation, we talked about using AI if applicable. Here, I'm going to argue that we don't need it. It's not applicable. You can use other algorithm tools to do similar stuff. So when you think of basic, simple algorithm models are like statistical regressions, where you have statistics experts, and they're able to review the data and they're able to go through it and kind of pull out insights. It kind of just looking at the level of complexity of, is this necessary? No, in our opinion, this scenario, not necessary based on the existing traditional data sources. Even when using the innovative data sources, it's just not essential in this case.
And there's something that we've been liking to understand this problem is that, how AI can be harnessed versus how well-being could be measured are very different approaches to the problem. Whereas AI is a tool often used to improve something. And when you have a problem, we may not necessarily want to sandwich like a tool that may not be able to meet the needs of the problem or the necessary solutions.
Okay, very last question to Jennifer Welsh. It's going to have to be very short, very sweet, with equally short and sweet answers. Jennifer, take it away.
Yeah, it was just a question about specifically geospatial data and what you thought the most relevant applications of that would be in this context.
Yeah, I can take this question. I think in this context, geospatial data is really interesting for CED because it can cover rural areas and remote communities and provide at the same time real-time data with location coordinate information. There's also some limitations, however, because there is some privacy and ethical concerns in using GPS data, for example. And then I'll just give you a quick example because you asked for an example. We studied an example in Tuscany where they use GPS to track human mobility, and they found a positive correlation with poverty indexes. And they were able to also independently survey the population to kind of complement the information with the GPS data.
Okay, folks, I'm going to bring this to a close. Good job, team. I want to thank you all. Thank you all in the audience for participating. Some of you have been here through all 8 presentations. Some of you have just been here for this presentation, but thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you to the people at DEC or CED for sponsoring. I believe you sponsored us as well last year for Policy Lab, so thank you twice in a row. Nick King behind the scenes coaching this team. Thank you very much for your time and commitment on this. And of course, the team itself, Michaela, Leo, Rim, and Ellen, great job. And tough to be the 8th out of 8, but well done, very well done. And I cannot say goodbye to everybody without thanking Natalie Duchenet. Natalie is the person, the Policy Lab dynamo Uber coach. She is the one that is recruiting all of the sponsors. She is the one that is scoping with the sponsors, scoping out the projects. She is the one that is recruiting and finding the coaches. She is the Uber coach. She is the Uber driver. Not really the Uber driver, but the Uber driver of the whole project. So Natalie, thank you very much for everything on this. And that completes all of the Policy Lab presentations. Now, the students, you need to shut down your computer and take a very good couple of hour break. At 6:30 p.m. tonight, Montreal time, I hope you will be back here for our online graduation ceremony. And you've all got the details on that. So that happens basically 2.5 hours from now. So until then, I bid you all farewell and congratulations once again to everybody, and thanks once again to everybody. See you all soon.